Hi, I'm Dave Annell. Welcome to the ninth episode of Setting the Record Straight. This is the first of a two-parter in which I want to look at a couple of interconnected issues relating to the registration of births in England and Wales from the start of the civil registration system in 1837 up to the mid-1870s. It was while I was working as a researcher in London in the early 1980s that I first met Audrey Collins. Over the years, we became close friends, discovering that we had similar interests in areas such as music, politics, and alternative comedy. And after 20 or so years of bumping into each other at St Catherine's House, Somerset House, Chancery Lane, and Portugal Street, we ended up working together at the Family Record Centre, on the other side of the inquiry desk, as poachers turned gamekeepers. We shared a passion for family history, and we found that we both felt the same way about a number of aspects of research. One thing we both felt particularly strongly about was the question of the under-registration of births. We frequently heard researchers and occasionally other members of staff suggesting that as a significant percentage of births were never registered, it was hardly surprising if you failed to find the record you were looking for. We heard various figures being bandied about, some even suggesting that as many as 30% of births were unregistered. And they always explained it by saying that before 1875, it wasn't compulsory to register births anyway. Audrey and I had two issues with this. First of all, our perception from a combined 50 years or so of using the records was that the overall rate of non-registration was much lower, that not finding a birth record was very much the exception. We were also not at all convinced by the idea that registering the births was ever in any way optional. The legislation behind it all was admittedly somewhat unclear. The registrars had primary responsibility for ensuring that births were registered. The wording of the legislation is interesting. Section 18 of the 1836 Act says that they were required to inform themselves of every birth that took place in their district. Exactly how they were supposed to do this wasn't specified, but it was clear that the parents had a responsibility as well. Section 19 goes on to say that the father or mother of any child born may, within 42 days next after the day of such birth, give notice of such birth to the registrar of the district. And then in section 20, it says that the father or mother of every child born in England shall, within 42 days next after the day of every such birth, give information upon being requested so to do to the said registrar. It is quite confusing, and it's the use of the word may in section 19, together with the absence of any reference to what would happen if the parents refused to give the required information upon being requested so to do, that has led people to conclude that registering births was therefore not compulsory. But it's not hard to find evidence of parents being prosecuted for refusing to register the births of their children. The best example I found concerns a woman called Mary Shaw of Thurlaston in Leicestershire, who had given birth to a daughter in the summer of 1838. On the 1st of September, the registrar, William Warner, called on Mary for the purpose of registering her child, but she refused to do so. When he asked the name of the child, she replied that she should have the child baptized at the church as usual. Mary was at least as good as her word on this matter, as the Thurlaston parish register records the baptism of Anne Rylott Shaw, daughter of John and Mary, the following day. 4 months later, on the 3rd of January 1839, Mary Shaw appeared before the Leicestershire Quarter Sessions, charged with contemptuously disobeying a recent Act of Parliament. The evidence presented by the Registrar General included a letter addressed to Mrs. Shaw, part of which reads, "Some persons may perhaps imagine that because no penalty is specially imposed, compliance is optional, and refusal to comply not punishable by law. In case such should be your present belief, I am hereby directed to inform you that it is ruled that if a statute enjoins an act to be done without pointing out any mode of punishment, an indictment will lie for disobeying the injunction of the legislature." Take a minute or two to absorb this, and then ask yourself whether or not it was compulsory to register births at this time. In the next episode of Setting the Record Straight, I'll take a more detailed look at the question of the rate of under-registration, and I'll ask what impact, if any, the 1874 Act, which, if we're to believe the "don't be surprised if you can't find your ancestors' birth record before 1875" narrative made all the difference, actually had. Thanks for listening.